All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&Done, your guide to the one D&D playtest. Remember when this channel was all about D&D stuff, and why, like, most of you probably subscribed to it? Yeah, we're finally getting back to that. So, today, we're finally going to cover the last parts of the August 2022 playtest materials for 1 D&D. Sorry it has taken so long. As I've mentioned in my other videos I posted last week, I've not been in a good place recently. And to be perfectly honest, I realized today as I was getting my setup ready exactly why it is, excuse me, exactly why it is that I've had such a hard time recording this particular episode, because the other two ones were not difficult for me to record at all. And technically, this one isn't quote unquote difficult. Nothing in here is really that complicated. The issue has been, and this is something that people with depression and anxiety will sometimes come across this thing, is that I don't like this part of the playtest. Now, let me clarify that a little bit. I don't think this is quote unquote bad. I don't think that this is running D&D. I also don't think, wow, this is just a step in the right direction and it's going to make the game so much better in the future. So something, again, from doing not only D&D deep dives, but also from doing my in-depth reviews and just starting to collect different RPGs, one of the things that I believe is really, really important to a successful RPG. So I had some stuff on my glasses and it was driving me nuts. One of the things I think is essential to a successful RPG is when you're reading the descriptions of things in there, you need to be excited about it. And what I mean by that is when I'm reading a new subclass or a new D&D supplement in general, when I start going over the stuff, something in it should make me go, ooh, that looks fun, or ooh, I really want to try that, or ooh, that's different. I wonder, it should inspire me to some sort of action. Because, again, the entire point of an RPG is to play it, role-playing game. And if I read a book and nothing about it makes me go, ooh, I want to try that, that generally is a detriment to the game. It's going to make me less likely to want to purchase future aspects of the products. It's going to make me less likely to want to try that. Because again, we live in a time right now where we are just flooded with different options for RPGs. If you want to start playing RPGs, this is one of the best times that have ever existed to play RPGs, because you have your choice of almost anything you can think of. If you want something that's really, really rules heavy and really, really crunchy that you can really dive into and kind of min-max the hell out of it, those exist, and tons of them exist. If you want a really, really rules light where you really can create the exact character you want and you can make them play the exact way you want because the rules are going to get out of your way and let you do the things that you want to do to feel cool, that exists too, and there's tons of them. If you want a power fantasy, it exists. If you want a bleak, trying to eke out existence, it exists. If you want to play in the future, if you want to play in the past, if you want horror, if you want Western, if you want high fantasy, low fantasy, dark fantasy, light fantasy, green fantasy, blue fantasy, all of it exists. So, in order to cut through the kind of sea of products, something about your product has to be attention grabbing. And this is pure marketing. I'm talking about right here. This is the not pure marketing, as in they haven't marketed one D&D correctly. No, their marketing team, while making some massively stupid ideas like calling it one D&D, their marketing team is pretty damn good. And it's Dungeons and Dragons. It is the most popular RPG. They don't really need that great a marketing to the team. It already has the lion's share of the market and all those things. No, what I'm talking about is the idea behind marketing theory. Stuff that first started showing up. I part of my marketing degree, I got to take history of marketing, which wasn't a course. It was just part of my a few of my marketing courses. Marketing as we know it started around the 1950s, because before then, there wasn't enough competition for people to really need to quote unquote market their products. They just need to get their products out to people. It's one of the reasons why door-to-door salesmen were so successful pre-1950s, because again, you didn't have to have the best product of its kind. Generally, you were the only product of its kind in any market. So you just need to get it in front of people to get them to buy it. Didn't matter how you pitched it. It was just, hey, do you want a Cracker Barrel? Which is a really, really big, incredible thing for like half a century or over a century, easily. Well, here, we make Cracker Barrels, and I've brought one here. Just pay me, $20 or however much it was going for at that particular point in time. So that's what I'm talking about here, is this marketing in general was when there was a lot of, it started developing, there was a lot of different products that could be gotten to a lot of different markets. And then you had to start dealing with things like product recognition. The most important aspect of marketing in general is product recognition. People can't buy your product if they don't know it exists. And so that's what I'm talking about here, is there has to be something that gets me excited about it. And nothing in the, what are they called? I think they call it legacies here. No, origins. They call it origins. Nothing in the origins document, which is a combination of what used to be called races. Now they call them... No, they do call them races. That's a dumb idea. Okay, so they do call them races. They need to change that. And they probably will. Well, maybe not, because race has been a big deal in D&D for a while. Who knows? Anyway, I had a whole conversation about this in the comment section of one of my other videos. But anyway, so... it's a combination of the races section and the background section. Races, like I said, have been a part of D&D since its inception. Backgrounds are a relatively new thing. Technically, I think backgrounds kind of existed in 3rd edition, but they weren't really that big a deal. You got most of your stuff from your race and your class. Backgrounds are mostly a flavor thing. 4th edition was when they first started introducing backgrounds that actually gave you mechanical features. In 5th edition, backgrounds are a major part of character creation. So there's nothing in here that really gets me excited going, ooh, that could be fun, or ooh, that could be interesting. It's just really boring. Like, everything about this is boring. Nothing in this section makes me go, ooh, I could create a really interesting character out of that. So do I think this is bad? No. Do I think it is good? No. I don't think there's enough here to really understand what we're looking at, other than, hey, does this look cool? Like, that's what this entire playtest packet has really been, is, hey, does this look cool? And the rest of it has been, some of it's cool, some of it's not so cool. This one is a resounding, no, it doesn't look cool. Doesn't mean it's bad, but there's nothing in here I'm like, whoa, cool. It's just boring. And especially since your race and your background should be something interesting, should be something Because again, that is 2/3 of your starting character is your race and your background. Your class is the other third. Now, obviously, everybody puts a huge emphasis on the class because in D&D, as it has always been, your class is your major defining feature. Yes, your background does add a little bit of flavor, and especially in early 5th edition, your race kind of changed things, but really it was, do you have dark vision and do you have something that's actually useful as a racial feature, which 9 out of 10 races, no, they didn't. The newer Monsters of the Multiverse versions of them are a lot better, but again, classes have been the big deal. But even in early 5th edition, Player's Handbook kind of stuff, there was still stuff where you would read the race and they would put lore and stuff into it, and it was really cool and interesting, and they would have actual features of the race that might not be super, super useful the entire campaign, but they did kind of inspire you to do something interesting with your character. And these just don't. Like, there's nothing in here that I'm like, ooh, this is super cool. And I think that's been the biggest reason why I've had a problem, because it's easy to make content about things that you have a strong opinion on. And I just don't. I don't think they're bad. I don't think they're good. I think they're meh. And until I see something I can actually playtest, because none of this stuff can you playtest right now. There is not enough of a system here to playtest. And as much as they say, oh, well, this will be backwards compatible, it's not. 100% this is not backwards compatible with 5th edition. Not what they have here. Maybe the final product will be, but nothing they have here can you just shove it into a 5th edition game and have anything other than a clusterfuck. So, yeah. Let's dive into this stuff. Again, basic rule of thumb. Do not drink carbonated beverages when you are doing public speaking. It's a bad idea. The only reason I am is this is ginger ale, and I am still dealing with constant nausea, and it's one of the few things that helps. That won't kill me. That's another story. So, the first half, the first half, races. So yeah, these are the different races. The races that they have in here are not remarkably surprising in general. Your races are humans, Ardlings, which we will talk about the Ardlings in a second here, because that is the one thing that's like, that's interesting. Dragonborn, Dwarves, Elves, Gnomes, Halflings, Orcs, and Tieflings. So if you look at generally what shows up in the first player's handbook of most editions of D&D, most of these races make sense. Humans are always in there. Dragonborns have been a quote-unquote default race since 4th edition. 4th edition, they showed up in Player's Handbook 1, and they became a really big part of D&D in general. They even kind of rewrote the Forgotten Realms to allow Dragonborn to exist there natively. But beforehand, Dragonborn didn't exist in the Forgotten Realms. Or they did, but there was a huge retcon in 4th edition that some people hated, some people loved. I actually liked it more than I hated it, but the Dragonborn thing wasn't a bad thing, but it was a remarkably confusing thing, where they actually came from Toril, where they came from Abir, and the traditional Forgotten Realms that we think of as Toril, and so they're actually a parallel. It's weird. Anyway, so Dragonborn are normal, Elves, Dwarves, Gnomes, Halflings. Again, all of these things. The Gnome is probably the quote-unquote most recent addition to this list, but Elves, Dwarves, Dwarves, and Halflings are all from the original version of D&D. And they're based on the kind of Tolkien races. Dungeons & Dragons took heavy inspiration from The Lord of the Rings and the other works by J.R.R. Tolkien. To the point where they actually got sued and had to change a few things because they took names that they weren't supposed to. Um, but so those are standard. Two weird things in here is, first of all, the orc. Um, Orcs, I don't think orcs have ever been a player race from the beginning of any edition of D&D. And in general, orcs don't generally become a player race. Orcs have always been kind of your generic bad guys. And the only time you ever really got to play an orc is if you were a half orc. Now, you'll notice nothing in here. Something that's really, really common in almost every edition of D&D is the half elf race. You generally, I don't think I've ever seen a half dwarf. I have never seen a half halfling, a half gnome, but half elves are super, super common. And again, most of this is because they showed up in Lord of the Rings. So now, if you were to just read the titles of this, you would go, what? Half races aren't a thing anymore? Well, they are, and I'm trying to see if I can find where they talk about. Basically, your half races now is you can be half anything, half anything. And I'm trying to see if I can find where they actually mention that in here. I might have missed it in one of the other sections, because I'm either in the backgrounds and I'm not seeing it. Feats. Anyway, I remember reading it somewhere, and I can't remember where. But they are going to have, maybe it's in the build your own race section. Rules glossary, race background related, creature type, There's a whole section called Children of Different Humanoid Kinds. If you like to play, to choose two race options that are humanoid to represent your parents. Then determine which of those race options provides your game traits, size, speed, and special traits. You then mix and match visual characteristics of the two options. For example, your character is halfling and gnome parents. You might choose halfling for your game traits and then decide that your character has the pointed ears that are characteristic of a gnome. Finally, determine the average of the two options' lifespans. So it really is just a kind of mix and match, kind of. But effectively, like, half elves are basically going to be either more elf, or half elves used to be elves and humans. That was the only combination there was. So according to this, it's basically, if you're a half elf, you either get to choose the elf mechanics or the human mechanics, and then everything else is flavor. Which pissed off quite a few people. So yeah, I sincerely doubt this is, even if one D&D, which is D&D 5.5, even if it launches with this is how half races work, there will be a supplement eventually that adds half races that get more than just, well, you're a differently flavored human. Or you're a differently flavored elf. You're a human flavored elf, or you're an orc flavored halfling, or something like that. I will guarantee that's going to be for here. Again, for people like me that they reskin things all the time, this doesn't even need to exist. Like, if I wanted to create my own halfling, half race, I could do exactly what they're describing here without them telling me that I can do that, because flavoring shouldn't be an issue ever. But yeah, so again, this is another thing where I don't think it's good. I don't think it's bad. But nothing about half races makes me excited. Nothing about it here goes, oh, cool, I could create. No, it's just, all right, they're giving me permission to flavor text. That kind of goes with the territory. Like, again, flavor text has no mechanical benefit whatsoever. It's flavor. So saying, hey, just flavor text it is boring. And that's kind of what we see here. So, yeah, let's move on to the actual races. The first race, humans. Humans get a bit of a bad rep because, kind of by definition, they're boring. There's nothing really special about them. However, since about, well, even if you go back to second and first editions, humans would have certain things that just made them unique to play. If you go to the early editions, humans were the only race that could, I have to remember, I believe it was called dual classing. What dual classing was, probably second edition is the one where it was the easiest to understand. And I think that might be the one where it was big. First of all, earlier editions of D&D classes were restricted by race. And so humans generally would have something useful. Generally, it was the paladin class was exclusive to humans until like third edition. Specifically, it's exclusive to lawful good humans, but we can talk about that later. So that was one thing, is they generally had access to every single class. So that made them kind of interesting. And then starting in second edition, they had this thing where they could dual class. Basically, you would level up one class, then you would stop leveling in that class, and you would start another class. And you level that one up. And basically what would happen is you had no access to anything that you earned in your previous class until your new class came up to the same level. And then you were effectively dual classed. No other races could do that. Elves and other non-humanoid races could do what was called dual classing. Multi, I don't know what it was called. Basically, when you picked your class as an elf, one of the classes you could choose was like fighter mage. And basically what it was is you were both a fighter and a mage, and basically every time you leveled up, you would level one or the other, and it just alternated. And so that's how that kind of multi-classing worked. Humans actually had a completely different thing called dual classing, and there's only specific combinations for elves. Like, elves could be fighter mages or fighter rogues, but they couldn't be like cleric fighters or something like that. And different races had different combinations that they could multi-class in. But there was a choice at level 1. You couldn't do it later on. So that's what made humans interesting. Once you got to third edition, humans, their kind of default thing was they got an additional feat at character creation. And in both third and fourth edition, feats were not massive, but it meant that because feat trees were a huge thing, especially in third edition, it meant that it was significantly easier for you to start getting to the actual useful parts of your feat tree, because right at first level, you could take 2 feats instead of 1. Fifth edition added, and another thing that tended to be common, especially in third and second edition, was they would just get kind of a blanket bump to all their stats. A +1 to all their stats was really common. In fifth edition, that is the default version of the human, is you just get a +1 to every single stat, which really isn't that useful, to be perfectly honest. Fifth edition doesn't kind of force specialization nearly as much as fourth and third edition did. But specialization is still a good thing, and just giving you a +1 bump to everything just really isn't that useful. The alternate option in 5th edition was, instead of getting a +1 bump to everything, you get a +1 bump to 2 stats, which is perfectly fine. It's not as nice as a +2 and a +1, but it's not bad. And you get a feat at level 1, which in 5th edition, feats are supposed to be really impactful. And so that turned humans in 5th edition into a min-maxer's dream, because you could take a lot of different things. Like a human barbarian could take the Great Weapon Master feat at level 1 and literally one-shot most monsters that you'll be facing at level 1. And because armor classes really are not that high, it wouldn't really matter that you were taking the -5 when you're making your great weapon master strikes. And once you got to level 2 and you got reckless attack, you were just one-shotting everything because you just did so much damage with your attacks. So that was a really, really popular combination for low-level min-maxers. There was also, like, there's so many different things you can do. Take Magic Initiate and get access to a bunch of cantrips that level up with you. Like a human rogue could take Magic Initiate, get one of the Bladesinger cantrips, and now they have a significantly more powerful basic attack that adds on their sneak attack to damage. Like, there's a lot of really good combinations. So what do they do in 1 D&D? Well, all of that is really gone. The things that make... First of all, you don't get attribute bonus as part of your race, as part of your background. So, again, I don't have a strong opinion on it either way. I don't have a problem with attribute bonuses being tied to your race. Because as I have mentioned in countless conversations, the word race in this setting does not mean the same as the word race that we use in the real world. There is nothing genetically different between an African American and a Caucasian American. Nothing. There's absolutely nothing. Now, you can have very, very long conversations about genetics and certain things being predisposed for other things, and certain diseases affecting certain races. But if you look at like taxonomy, if you don't know what that word is, that's the biological definition of races and species and things like that. The kingdom, phylum, class, phylum. Oh, I don't remember. Why do kings play chess on fancy green squares? So, anyway, so that kingdom, phylum, class, family, order, family, genus, species. There we go. Every single human on Earth right now is Homo sapien. They're the exact same species. Races in D&D are not the same species. It would be the same as same genus, so still Homo, but different species. And there are differences. Technically, there are differences. We have seen differences within the same quote-unquote species. Yeah, so this idea that, somehow if you think attribute scores should be tied to race, you are somehow racist or something like that. No, it is a completely different thing. And in some in some settings, elves can't mate with humans. They're completely incompatible. And in a lot of settings, the reason that half dwarves don't exist is because dwarves and humans can't really mate in a lot of them. In the Dark Sun setting, the mating of dwarves and humans can create what's called a mull, which is an infertile male half dwarf, effectively. And the reason they're called mull is they are compared to what's called a mule. A mule is a crossbreed between, I believe it's a donkey and a horse. They are always male. They're always infertile. And the reason that they are bred is they are really great workhorse animals. They combine basically both the best aspects of both of those different species. So that's where the mull comes from in Dark Sun. So this idea that somehow race, tying attributes to race is somehow racist or something. No, it's seen in nature. Different breeds of dogs, which I believe are the same species. They may not be. I'm not as super up to, but they can interbreed. I know that. A poodle has different hair than other dogs. They have actual hair like humans, not fur like most other dogs. You know, a border collie is smarter than a pit bull. You know, these are things that are just normal. Different variations and things like that. Just because they can interbreed doesn't mean that they're not different biologically. And so, yes, I do not have a problem with races having the attribute bonuses tied to them. I also don't have a problem with them being built into the background. And I think the best way to do it is what we've been doing since Tasha's, which is, well, this is kind of the default, but if you don't like that, just pick one stat to give a +2 and one stat to give a +1 and make whatever fucking character you want. I like that because it means that I can play a weird elf that is neither agile nor smart. Like, I'd love to be the super clumsy, dumb elf that just kind of always wanders around. Like, my favorite character idea that I've never got a chance to play is actually an idea that is posited in Open Legend, because there is a stat in there. Open Legend is a skill-based RPG, meaning not that you have to be skilled to play it, but all of your abilities or things are based off skills, not based on what class you chose. There are no classes in Open Legend. And one of the attributes they have, one of the quote-unquote skills that they have, is called Presence. And Presence is basically how much you can influence other things around you. And one of the kind of explanations of how presences work is the idea of luck. And they have a feat you can take, which basically allows you to substitute one attribute for another in certain checks. Like, let's say you're playing like a shadow monk. So you decide that you think your character's control of shadows should be what affects, you know, how good they are at controlling shadows should be what affects your attack rolls. Or maybe your control of shadows should affect your guard score or things like that. There's a feat that lets you do that. And one of the explanations they give is if someone was to use presence over agility for attack rolls and things like that. And the explanation they have is, what if it's just someone that's like really, really lucky? Like they're not trained in anything. They're not agile in any way, shape, or form. But they just kind of, when they accidentally trip, they just accidentally hit the person. And I think that is one of the most interesting ideas. Effectively, you would make a Jackie Chan style character, where if you watch a lot of Jackie Chan's fights, depending on the movie, obviously, you know, a lot of them are him going, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, when I do this, and then I accidentally hit this guy. And like, it's just a really fun style. So, you know, the idea of playing an elf who just mistakes his way into winning combat, I think is amazing. And I think is a really fun character to play, especially if there is a quote-unquote default. A lot of people think that the idea of a default idea for a race, like the elves are generally tall and beautiful, and either very dexterous or very smart. They think that somehow is like, oh, well, that's just horrible, you're racist. No, having a default means when you stray from that, you are that much more unique, and it gives your character motivation to deal with things. Are they happy that they are not the kind of standard elf? Are they upset about it? Did they get teased when they were a kid and took it to heart and feel that there's some kind of failure? And that's their kind of character growth, is them learning to come to terms with the fact that just because they don't exemplify the kind of default status doesn't mean that they're any less of an elf or any less of deserving praise or things, or that they can't do something. That is a really powerful character arc to go through, and it's a really fun character arc to role play through. And we see this constantly in media where, the idea of rooting for the underdog, that is entirely because there is a default in societies. Every society has slightly different defaults, but the default generally tends to be pretty tall and fit in some way. For people that identify more with the feminine side, fit means low body fat and smooth. For people that identify more with the more masculine side, fit means muscular. But we have a default setting in society right now. And it is praised incessantly. And so the idea that there is no default setting, I don't think tracks with reality. Oh, but this is a game where you can throw fireballs. Yes, but Magic and things still work under certain rules. If you can just make up whatever you want, like a really good example, Mage, the Ascension is a really, really interesting game. But the whole premise of the game is reality and laws of physics and things like that only work that way because everyone just kind of accepts it. And mages are people that realize that the rules are only there because people agree to them. And if you stop agreeing and you stop believing that dropping a ball will make it fall down, you can make things happen. So, by definition, that basically means that magic can do anything. But there are rules in Mage the Ascension that stops you from going, okay, well, then I'm going to turn into a sentient pickle that shits Skittles. Well, there are rules you have to make, and if other people are around, what happens is when other people start seeing you do things that don't make sense, it creates problems, and people stop agreeing on how reality is supposed to work, and that causes reality to break, causing these things called paradoxes. And that can actually severely hurt your character. It can kill your character. So even in a world where the rule is, well, there really are no rules, it's whatever you want, there are still rules that have kind of a logic for you to follow. If there are no rules, then nothing makes sense. And so, yes, societies in general do follow rules just across the board. Even in a magical world where people can make fireballs out of thin air and throw them at people, there's certain things that happen. And having a default that people like is a completely normal thing. We see it in every society ever. We see it in sub-societies constantly. A lot of people got really upset when Critical Role got bad because Critical Role became the default for D&D. And people didn't like that because Matt Mercer is an incredible dungeon master, but he also happens to be an unbelievably talented actor and an incredibly intelligent person in general. And when you combine those two things together, it is really hard to compete with that when he's doing exactly what he does best, telling stories and inhabiting different characters. That is literally what he gets paid to do every single day and has been for decades. So people didn't like that the default went from anybody, basically the default went from that one dude in Stranger Things season 4 that I can't remember his name because I'm really bad with names, but no spoilers. That used to be the default of kind of this weird guy that gets really, really into the worlds that he builds, into Matt Mercer, actor and incredibly intelligent person extraordinaire. Defaults exist. They're supposed to exist. And when they don't exist, we create them. We'll like that. So forgive my rant on this subject, but I don't have a problem with defaults existing. And specifically, I like defaults existing simply because that also implies that non-default exists as well. And it's a hell of a lot more fun to play a non-default than it is to play a default. Or sometimes just playing a default and realizing that default is not as default as you thought it was is another really interesting character arc. So these are all really amazing, wonderful ways to tell stories that when we throw all this stuff out and just go, well, you can be anything that you want to, you're doing a disservice to yourself as a storyteller. Conflict is what drives stories. We need to have conflict built into them. Doesn't mean you need to have combat, doesn't mean you need to have death, but conflict in general, where you have to struggle against something, struggle against yourself, struggle against someone else, struggle against society, struggle against your own belief structure, struggle against the laws of physics, whatever you want to do, but struggle and conflict are what drives storytelling. Theater, going back to my theater training, theater is about the day something happened. That was the first thing that was taught to me in history of theater when I first started, or actually this is my second year because I took all my acting courses my first year, and then I had the general ones that I didn't want to take because I already knew them. So history of theater is one of them. And theater is about the day that something happened. Unless it's theater of the absurd, and then it's about the day that nothing happened. But that's theater of the absurd, and if you are not a theater geek, you don't understand how hilarious that was. Theater is about the day something happened. Television about the day something happened. Movies are about the day something happened. Stories are about the day something happened. They're driven by conflict. So, yes, default versions of things are good. And playing the default is not a bad thing. That is a great starting point, and it can lead to a lot of really great storytelling. And sometimes that storytelling has nothing to do with the fact that you are a default or you are not a default. Or you are the idealized version of a society or the non-idealized version of a society. You don't have to tell that story. It just gives you another story you can tell. So going back to this damn human. Humans here, first of all, you can be medium or small, which again is another thing that just seems, the reason that they don't use actual heights in D&D and they just have size categories is because there's massive differentiation in the idea of what is medium. Medium itself has benefits mechanically. Small in general tends to have a lot of drawbacks, and they're specifically built around just basic rules of physics. If you are small, you generally have a lower speed because your legs are shorter. In previous editions, small characters couldn't wield heavy two-handed weapons and things like that without problems. Because again, you're small. If you're using a sword that is twice as big as you are, you're going to have problems, just from a pure mechanical leverage standpoint. So adding in that you can be a small human, it seems to me just kind of dumb. If you want to be a really short human, that's perfectly fine. Still using the medium rules just so you don't have to deal with the fact that it doesn't make sense that someone that has legs that are, a foot and a half long can run as fast as someone who has legs that are 3 feet long. It's just, if that's what you want to do, is perfectly fine. However, again, the entire purpose of calling it medium instead of, 7 foot tall or something like that. Because I don't know if you guys have ever met someone that is 7 foot tall. I have. It is a humbling experience, and I'm 6'4". When people meet me in real life, they go, "Ooh, I am still a medium creature." And I have friends. I've dated almost exclusively girls that are like a foot and a half or 2 feet shorter than me. One of the girls I dated, I kid you not, was 4'11", and I was 6'4" at the time, or I think I was 6'3". I hadn't quite gotten to 6'4" then, because I had a weird growth spurt at like 26. It was weird. We were adorable together because, again, I was literally over 2 foot taller than her, and so she came up to me at like here. It was really, really funny. And then when we would walk places, generally I like physical contact and stuff, and so when I would walk places with my significant other, I like to put my arm around them. and that was just something it's supposed to be. I couldn't because she was so low, and because our steps were so different. Like it would be like go 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 go, and so we tried holding hands. I don't really do good with holding hands because my palms sweat really really bad, and so we would just walk together, and invariably I would hear from behind me, "Hey, Amazon legs!" She was a really nice girl. She didn't sound like that at all, but I look back, and my girlfriend would be like dozen feet behind me, going, "Slow down!" I'm like, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Just, so anyway, yeah, the medium or small or whatever, I get the whole point behind it. I think it's pointless. Just call humanoids in general are medium and just leave it at that. You can be whatever size you want, whatever they, but as soon as you start dealing with different size categories, you're going to get min-maxers that are going to do weird shit with it. So, whatever. So, size, medium or small, speed, 30 feet. I don't think there's any of the races that don't have a default speed of 30 feet in this. I'm going to look really quick. But I believe everyone is 30 feet. So, there's really, yeah, every single character is 30 feet. So, and here's another thing just about game design in general. If you list something on a stat book, like for races, if you list speed on there as part of the racial traits, there needs to be a reason why. Otherwise, it's just reprinting the same thing over and over again, and there's no point to it. In this particular instance, I don't think they should list speed. Under each trait, just go kind of the default for all player characters is your speed starts at 30. That's what it already is here. So there's no point in putting your speed there when it's always the same for everyone. It's just wasted. It's just wasted space. And the more races that you have, the more times that you print this, and it's always done on one line, so it's not like it's just a couple characters. You are wasting a line of text on every single race. So that's dumb. So the defaults for everything is you have creature type, size, speed, lifespan, and those are the things that are going to be anything, and then you will have your special traits. The special traits for the human, as we've said before, humans generally have had something where, like in second edition, I think they got a bonus fighting style because that was effectively the same as feats, and then from third edition on, they got a bonus feat for the most part. Here you get resourceful. You gain inspiration whenever you finish a long rest, which is another thing that people were getting upset about. Because inspiration has effectively become kind of pointless. Every time you roll a nat 20, you get inspiration. And humans just get inspiration every morning. They start being able to give them. And it used to be that inspiration, that specific thing, was called DM inspiration. It was meant to be a way to reward role-playing. And DMs just didn't use it, and so now they're just trying to find ways to make inspiration useful, and this is not the way to do it. There are other systems that have a similar thing to inspiration, and they do it a lot better. Open Legend has it. The Essence 20 system has a version of inspiration, and they just do it a lot better. So that, for me, that doesn't make it exciting to play a human. Oh, you mean every day I can have one check that I get advantage on, even though there's so many other ways to get advantage on checks, and they're a lot more fun, like by going, well, since I used to be a pirate and we're talking about criminal things, can I have advantage on this lore check because I would be familiar with it? Yeah, that's a lot more fun than going, well, I'm a human, so I get my advantage for the day. It's dumb. Skillful, you gain proficiency in one skill of your choice. Again, this is kind of a thing that has existed with humans for a while. And again, it's just really not that much fun. Okay, you get proficiency in a skill. And then versatile. You gain the skilled feat, which, as we've talked about before, is kind of a boring feat. Or another first level feat of your choice. And again, some of the first level feats that we've seen already, that we talked about already, are not equal. There are ones that are significantly more game breaking than others. And again, I'm not a huge fan of backgrounds just being a way to get a feat. I am a huge fan of backgrounds giving you something unique to your character. And so the idea of these first level feats, I really would prefer them to be background limited, meaning the only way you can get these particular feats are from a background, because that makes your background useful. In the regular version of D&D 5e, your background features up until recently, where background features are just ways to get feats, the old version of background features, they actually were features. And they were unique to the background. Like the charlatan one is one of my favorites. You can counterfeit any document that you've seen before. That is a huge thing, and there's nothing in the game that gives you that ability. The only way to get that is through your background. That I think is cool. That I think is interesting. That's what I want to see. Giving humans the ability to effectively get double backgrounds. Because the rest of your background really isn't going to do that much for you. Humans get 2 backgrounds instead of 1. To be perfectly honest, I'd actually be more okay with the idea that humans get 2 backgrounds instead of you just get to pick a background feat. I think that would be significantly more interesting. And that would make me excited to play a human. To be able to go, ooh, I could be a criminal baker. Hello, Sweeney Todd. Like, that would be really, really fun. This, well, you just gain either the skilled feat, which is kind of a pointless feat, or a first level feat of your choice. It's not as much fun. Let me choose that and say you only get to, you can choose 2 backgrounds instead of 1, but you only get the equipment from one of them or something like that. Put some limitations, but let me be the the sailor the sailor officer, or I don't know what any of the backgrounds are right now because I haven't looked at them in a while. Let me get just 2 random backgrounds. The Acolyte Cultist! That would be super fun! Or the Artisan Entertainer. That would be super fun. Like, make being a human something that's still fun. That would be really cool. And that would, again, mean that being a human, and again, you wouldn't want to make it super overpowered, so obviously balancing would have to be in there. That would be a cool thing and it would kind of be traditional if you look back at the history of D&D, of humans, that idea that humans used to be able to dual class, where other races could only multi-class. That would kind of be a callback to 2nd edition, at least, which is a really, really well-loved edition. Like, a lot of people really liked, other than Thaco, which wasn't nearly as bad as people make it out to be, but it was actually compared to the old system where every monster had a different table you had to look at, and every class had a different table, and you would roll, and then you'd have to look on the table, and there was no way for you to know from your roll whether you're going to hit or not. Thaco was a huge improvement. That would be super cool. This version of human, just kind of boring. And then the description of humans is just, they're everything! Which, let's be perfectly honest, in every fantasy setting, humans are going to be the, well, what do you want to do? They are the blah race. You want to be a bunch of pirates? You go be a human. You want to be, the boring people that just farm all the time? Go be a human. Like, it's... So anyway, that's humans. Moving on. This is going to be a massively long video, and I'm super sorry about that, but again, it's been a while since I've done this, so you have to forgive me for rambling. The next race, the Ardling. This, I think, is probably the most interesting thing about this playtest material, because the Ardling race has never existed before in any version of D&D. What is an Ardling? Ardlings are effectively the celestial counterpart to the Tiefling. Now, a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, no, that's the Aasimar, and Aasimar have existed for decades. You're wrong. Yes, Asmar have existed for decades. They don't exist in one D&D as we know, or as we know of right now, and Ardlings seem to be replacing them. I'm going to read the description of it because I think it gives the best idea. Ardlings are supernal beings who are either born on the upper planes or have one or more ancestors who originated there. Their bright soul shines with the light of immortal beings who call the upper plane home. An Ardling has a head resembling that of an animal, typically one with virtuous associations. Depending on the animal, the Ardling might also have soft fur, downy feathers, or supple bare skin. The Ardling's celestial legacy determines the animal it resembles. An Ardling gains a measure of magical power from their celestial legacy, as well as the ability to manifest spectral wings. An Ardling's moral and ethical outlook is self-determined, however, not fixed by ancestry. The three celestial legacies are follows: exalted, heavenly, and idyllic. And this is the thing that's weird because it says that the basically Ardlings are humanoids with animal heads. So you could call a Minotaur an Ardling from a visual perspective because that's kind of what you would see: humanoid body or human-ish body, beast head. So Minotaur technically kind of fits that, despite the fact that Minotaur are generally more associated with the lower planes than they are the upper planes. But that's kind of what you're thinking about, you know? However, exalted, the fierce passions of Arborea, the heroic heart of Isgard, and the wondrous nature of the Beastlands call to Ardlings who have the exalted celestial legacy. Their celestial ancestors are heroic champions of the chaotic good planes. None of that tells me anything about an animal. And they specifically said the Ardling's celestial legacy determines the animal it resembles. So exalted, what animals are from Arborea and Isgard? Neither of those are described anywhere in this document. Isgard is Norse mythology, I'm relatively certain. Or at least the name itself comes from Norse mythology. And Isgard apparently is in the Forgotten Realms. Yeah, but it's going to take a lot from Norse mythology. And then Arborea, well, arbor means plants. And again, it's another thing. Basically, it seems to be a very, kind of Feywild looking place. But neither of these are talked about anywhere in the document. And even me looking them up, neither of them has like creatures associated with it, other than Arborea is nature. So creatures you would find in nature, which is everything, whether you're going to be a trout, a buffalo. And then Isgard, again, Norse mythology has a lot of unique creatures and stuff in it. And again, the Isgard in the Forgotten Realms the quick glance I had, it didn't tell me any specific animals I should be emulating. So right off the bat, this is a bad description. Again, the problem with it is not so much that Exalted has not given you an idea of what it means. It's the fact that there's a sentence, a paragraph away, that says the Ardling's celestial legacy determines the animal it resembles. And then you go to the first celestial legacy and it does not tell you what animal you're supposed to resemble. So this is contradicting statements. Again, I understand the idea of, well, we don't want to pigeonhole, we don't want to, shoehorn people into a specific thing. We want to give them choices. That's perfectly fine. Do not put rules into your description that you immediately break. That's bad design. The next one, heavenly, the blissful harmony of Arcadia, the unwavering justice of Mount Celestia, and the bucolic paradise of Betopia touch the souls of Ardlings who have the heavenly celestial legacy. Their celestial ancestors are staunch defenders of the lawful good planes. Again, Nothing about this says an animal. Let's go to the last one. Idyllic. The idyllic celestial legacy connects Ardlings not only to the beastlands of Betopia, but also the eternal compassion of Elysium. Their celestial ancestors are paragons of kindness who hail from the neutral good plains. No animals! Again, the way that they describe this is exalted should look different from heavenly, which should look different from idyllic. Nothing anywhere in here gives you an idea of what that means. There's not a single... And again, all the references that they make here are references to like Mount Celestia or Elysium. These are all things that have been defined, but they're not in this document anywhere. They're not referenced. You know, if I wanted to look for Elysium, well, Elysium is a movie starring Matt Damon. About these people that live on the earth that are basically the super low class, and these people that live above them in Elysium that are super high class. And he has to get, I think this is Elysium, it's a movie. So by saying the eternal compassion of Elysium, and not telling us Elysium from the Forgotten Realms, Elysium from Norse mythology, Elysium from... I actually don't even know where the root word Elysium comes from. It might be Greek. I'm not sure. It is mythological in nature. By just saying these random words, we don't know anything. Does that mean the idyllic all have mechanical exoskeletons and look like Matt Damon? Or actually, instead of a head, they actually have the full form of Matt Damon as their... in place of their head. Like him with his muscles and his accent and everything. Like, you know, apparently idyllic are all from Boston, because Elysium is a movie with Matt Damon in it. This is the problem I have. If you're going to do things like this, you need to give a better idea, especially since Ardlings have never existed before. This is a brand new thing that you just kind of throw in there and go, oh yeah, this is what it is. That would be me like saying like, well, I created a new race. It's called the Gorinshire. Yeah, they're the Gorinshire. And basically, Gorinshire come from the plain of Subaruburuburubu. And they actually look like, they actually evolve from a species of animal that is native to Subaruburuburubu, called the... So, if you're making that, just make sure it looks a lot like a... Okay? Like, that's exactly what's being done here. And nothing about this makes me interested in playing an Ardling. I'm not excited about playing an Ardling because I've got no fucking clue what it is. Maybe the traits will give us something better. One thing I do think is kind of interesting about this. Creature type humanoid, size medium or small. However, for human, medium is 4 to 7 feet tall. Small is 2 to 4 feet tall. For Ardlings, medium is 4 to 7 feet tall. Small is 3 to 4 feet tall. So why are Ardling small creatures taller than human small creatures? Why? There's no reason for it. Again, if the whole point of saying, well, you can be medium or small is specifically because they don't want people to feel like they can't create the character that they want, or they can't create a character that exemplifies them in this fantasy world. Why are there differences in small between Ardlings and humans? Like, the only difference between an Ardling and a human... And again, Ardlings aren't taller. They're just less short when they're small. They're still 4 to 7 feet tall when they're medium, but when they're small, they're only 3 to 4 feet tall instead of 2 to 4 feet tall. So why can humans get shorter than Ardlings? Again, if the only problem I have with this, again, I don't have a problem with the small thing other than mechanics. And I think if you want to play a small humanoid, still considering the medium doesn't really cause that big an issue. But whatever. The only reason I have a problem with this is they declared what small meant for humans, and then apparently Ardlings have a different definition of small. And I don't know if this is a typo or something. But it just annoys the hell out of me that, again, they have made a rule and broken it in less than a page. And that is bad game design. So what special traits do you have as an Ardling? First, you have Angelic Flight. As a bonus action, you get Spectral Wings. Allows you to fly a number of feet equal to your speed. And if you're in the air at the end of this movement, you fall if nothing is holding you aloft. And you can use a bonus action number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, get them all back in a long rest. So effectively, your bonus action is not just additional movement. You can effectively dash as your bonus action, but you can dash as your bonus action, and that movement is flight. Which again, compared to skillful, this is significantly more useful. It's not just that you have a flying speed. You can use your bonus action, which again, action economy, big deal in 5th edition. Don't know about 1 D&D, but it's a big deal in 5th edition. You now have an additional thing that you can do, which generally is limited to monks and rogues. So just because of this, Ardlings have made Step of the Wind and Cunning Action less useful, because both monks and rogues do not get the ability to fly as their dash on their bonus action. But Ardlings get to just because. So I would be more okay with this if it was as a bonus action you gain a flying speed instead of as a bonus action you get spectral wings and move. Because again, that's translating your bonus action into a move, and that wrecks action economy. That's not the only thing they get, folks. Let's see what's behind door number 2. Celestial Legacy. Choose a legacy for the Celestial Legacies. Exalted is chaotic good. Heavenly is lawful good. Idyllic is neutral good. You gain the initial benefits of the chosen legacy, a cantrip that you learn. You also choose the animal you most closely resemble. A table provides a few suggestions for each legacy. So here they finally give us a table to explain what all this stuff is. I don't know why they wouldn't say that in the description before, but hey, at least we have. So Exalted is cat, eagle, goat, and mule. I don't know why cats are a part of Arborea, where they're not a part of Arcadia or Mount Celestia, but whatever. Heavenly, you get elf and owl, pig, stork, and idyllic is bear, dog, raven, toad. Again, none of these collections of animals make a ton of sense to me, but it's possible that I just don't understand the planes that they're coming from. If someone is more familiar with any of these things, let me know in the comments down below. And then your first level, you get thaumaturgy if you're exalted, light if you're heavenly, guidance if you're idyllic. Light is a really pointless cantrip. Guidance is a really useful cantrip. Thaumaturgy can be really, really useful. It's basically the divine version of prestidigitation, which prestidigitation is effectively your I'm magical cantrip and it lets you do magic things. Thaumaturgy is I'm divinely magical. So right off the bat, you have weird things where the idyllic, like guidance is massively useful. Light just isn't. Because light can be replaced with a torch. It gives the exact same amount of light as a light spell, and it's super, super cheap, and it's really, really easy to keep enough on them to never need the light cantrip. So if you are heavenly, you're probably almost never going to use your cantrip, whereas both thaumaturgy and guidance you're going to use constantly. And then as you go up, starting at 3rd level and again at 5th level, you gain the ability to cast higher level spell with this trait as shown on the table. Once you cast the spell with this trait, you can't cast that spell with it again until you finish a long rest. But you can use spell slots for it. And then Intelligence, Wisdom, Charisma is your spell casting ability for the spells you cast. You choose when you choose this legacy. And then the final thing you have is resistance to radiant damage. We don't care about that. So third level. For Exalted, you have Divine Favor. Heavenly, you have Cure Wounds. Cure Wounds is a very useful spell. An idyllic is healing words, which is a significantly more useful spell because it's ranged and it's a bonus action. And again, because you are casting these at first, these are all first level spells. Because you are casting them at first levels, Cure Wounds generally tends to be not nearly as useful as Healing Words because healing in 5th edition is not great. Obviously, healing may be different in 1D&D, and that may make Cure Wounds really, really useful. But healing in 5th edition, the best way you can use healing in combat is when a character is unconscious, bringing them back to positive hit points makes them conscious again and makes them be able to act. You are almost never going to be able to, especially with first level spells, you are never going to be able to out heal the damage that is done to your characters ever. It just doesn't work. The reason Healing Word is generally better than Cure Wounds is because all you need is 1 hit point to get consciousness again. Healing Word can be done at range. Cure Wounds has to be touched. And Healing Word is a bonus action. Cure Wounds is your action. So Healing Word allows you to Healing Word and then do something else useful with your action. Cure Wounds, and you can do it from far away. Cure Wounds, you have to use your action to do it, so you can't do anything more useful than it. And you have to be right next to them. However, with your Angelic Flight, you can go there, and that's really nice. But, yeah, so... And then the 5th level one, Lesser Restoration, that is a remarkably useful one. Divine Favor, I gotta remember what Divine Favor does. Really? You're not gonna let me... Fine, I didn't want the last part of Divine. Oh, really? Divine Favor's awesome! It can't really be the spell, is it? Do I have it on... Yeah, it's a massively useful one. Divine Favor makes all your weapon attacks deal an extra D4 radiant damage. It's an additional damage of... it's additional die of damage. Like, it's a super useful spell. I didn't realize Divine Favor existed. By the way, what level is that? Yeah, it's 1st level. That's an awesome spell. I mean, it's a concentration spell, so, take it for what it's worth. But it's free damage. And especially if you get multiple attacks, like a fighter with Divine Favor, that's a really, really potent... Like, again, I get technically Paladins, because it's a Paladin spell. Paladins get Divine Favor, and so they're the ones that are supposed to use it. And it's a really good spell, but shit, that's a good spell. And it's, again, it's cast on yourself, so it's not like Hunter's Mark, where it only does a D4 damage, so it's not like Hunter's Mark does a D6. But it's still a good spell. Like, fuck. It's great. Compared to... So I guess, yeah, Heavenly just keeps getting shit on over and over and over again. Light, not a useful cantrip. Cure Wounds, not a useful 3rd level, or 1st level spell that you get at 3rd level. And then, last one, Lesser Restoration is Exalted. Lesser Restoration, super, super useful. Idyllic gets Animal Messenger. I mean, it's an okay spell. It lets you send a message by animal, so that's kind of cool. So there are some uses for it. Heavenly gets Zone of Truth, which isn't that useful because Zone of Truth just says that they can't lie. It doesn't force them to tell the truth. And it specifically says in the spell description, they can still be evasive in their answers. So telling an outright lie is not possible in a Zone of Truth. Telling... basically leaving out key details, as long as what you're saying is inherently true. Let's say you're trying to set up someone for murder for some odd reason. And you're in a Zone of Truth, and they go, hey, did you see this guy murder that guy? And you say, well, I saw, let's say Fred. Did you see Fred murder Bill? And you say, well, I saw Fred at the crime scene. That technically might be a truthful statement, especially if Fred, if Bill got killed in, The Office, and Fred and Bill both worked in The Office, and so you go, well, I definitely saw Fred at the murder site. Well, the murder site is The Office, where he goes every day. That is a 100% truthful thing that implies somehow he was connected. Nothing in your statement is false, and it would pass a zone of truth. Zone of truth, nowhere near as useful. And you can also resist the zone of truth. So there's always that. But just nowhere near as useful as Lesser Restoration, which gets rid of things like poison, which is a brutal, brutal thing, especially for low-level characters. And then Animal Messenger, like I said, there are uses for Animal Messenger. Dude, Heavenly Ardlings just get shit on. And Exalted basically get Divine Prestidigitation. They get glowing weapons that burn extra, or do extra radiant damage, but they do extra damage, and then they can remove poison and other bad stuff. What all does Lesser Restoration take out? I can't remember. What do you do? Blind, Deafen, Paralyzed. Paralyzed is another one that's really, really bad. Lesser Restoration gets rid of it. Lesser Restoration is a massively useful thing. Wow. So yeah, overall, again, nothing in the Ardling makes you go, ooh, this could be super, super fun. I've always wanted to play a fish-headed character. Nope. I don't think they allow you to be fish-headed, do you? No, Bear, Dog, Raven, Toad. And again, these are just suggestions, but I am a little bit mad that there's no lobster or snail or anything like that, because I think that would be a lot more fun than playing a mule-headed, exalted Ardling. So yeah, the whole thing about the Ardling here, they have created something new, which I am totally game for. I like Aasimar. I think they're really, really interesting. And I think as the opposite of the Tiefling, I think they work better than Ardlings will. But I like the potential that Ardlings could have. Because again, creating new races for D&D does not happen often. Like the Warforged was really the last kind of quote-unquote new race that was introduced to D&D, and that was way back in 3rd edition. Generally what happens is they either update races from previous editions, or they allow you to play monstrous races. But they're not like designing a brand new race for D&D, and Ardling is brand new, and the stuff that they do here just is bad. It's just bad. I don't like any of it. Anyway, moving on. Really? Come on. So this is the fun part about having a tremor. Every so often, that happens. Next one, Dragonborn. What do you think the Dragonborn are going to be like? So again, Dragonborn can only be medium. You can't be a short Dragonborn. Again, that one doesn't make any sense to me. Why not make everything can be medium and small? Because again, short I don't understand why it's more likely that a human would be short than a Dragonborn would be short. And again, size medium is 5 to 7 feet tall, whereas size medium for Ardlings is 4 to 7 feet tall. So this is another one where they just changed the rules, where Dragonborn are naturally taller. But I thought the reason we took attributes out is because there is no default. If there is no default, then why are Dragonborn only medium? And why can they not be as short as medium humans? Why are Dragonborn... And again, they're not any taller than humans. They're just not as short. I don't know why they did that. It seems to be a conflict. So that being said, the special traits, Draconic Ancestry, you choose a flavor of Dragonborn, and these are your traditional chromatic metallic ones. They don't have any of the gem dragons in here, which again is kind of typical of a new version of the D&D, where they just will forget that gem dragons exist. And then each one has an associated dragon damage type, and your choice of dragon ancestor affects the breath weapon and damage resistance trait, and then it also affects your appearance. Cool. Breath weapon. As an action, you exhale a destructive energy in a 15-foot cone. Each creature in the area must make a dex save. DC is 8 plus con plus proficiency. Failed save takes a D-plan plus your character level and damage of the type determined by your Draconic Ancestry check. Successful save, they take half damage. You can use breath weapon a number of times. You can do a proficiency bonus. Get them all back on a long rest. So this one is kind of interesting in the idea that the breath weapon doesn't level up, other than the additional damage is based on your character level, which is nowhere near as useful as the die leveling up in general. And by die leveling up, I mean adding extra dice. It does mean a level 20 Dragonborn can do up to 30 damage with his breath weapon, but 30 damage at level 20 is really, really small. And it's only a 15-foot cone. So a 15-foot cone on a battle map is basically 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares. So a grand total of 6 enemies can be hit by this if they are in perfect breath weapon formation. Generally, you are only going to ever hit 2 or 3 people with this, and 3 people is going to be rare. Generally, it's not going to be difficult to get 2 people in there, but sometimes, if you have help, you can get 3 people in your breath weapon. So, yeah, I'm not super... It's better than the current version of, or the original version of the breath weapon. The one that's in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, significantly better than this will ever be. If I remember correctly. Again, I'm having a hard time remembering what they did in Fizban's, but if I thought they leveled it up kind of like cantrips, as far as damage dice are concerned. Whatever, we'll see. Damage resistance, you have damage resistance. You get Dark Vision, Dragonborn, the first race of Dark Vision that we've seen, and then you also get the Draconic language. So this is another thing that I find is interesting, is Dragonborn have a language built into them, the rest of them don't. You do, I believe as part of your race, you do get to choose a language. Dragonborn effectively, I think just chooses the language for you, or you get it as additional. And again, having an additional language, your mileage will vary. Some DMs use languages a lot. Some DMs, everybody speaks common. Be entirely up to you. Moving on. The Dwarves. Again, another classic race. Dwarf traits. This is another one where they just randomly change things. So dwarves still medium, but they're only 4 to 5 feet tall. So humans can be as short as dwarves and shorter than dwarves. Dwarves cannot be small, though. You cannot have small dwarves. They're all between 4 to 5 feet tall. What are the rules that they're using? Because again, this idea that, well, humans can be anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall. Ardlings can be anywhere from 3 to 7 feet tall. Dragonborn can only be between 5 to 7 feet tall. And dwarves can only be between 4 to 5 feet tall. This seems to go against the kind of underlying idea of, well, we're trying to be more representative amongst things. But dwarves are not allowed to be small. If you're going to make changes to humans and this new race so that you can include people that may have dwarfism, which, by the way, dwarves as a fantastical race have existed longer than the term dwarfism. Yeah, if your whole idea is you want people to be able to see themselves more in the races that they choose and be able to basically have self-inserts, which I don't think self-inserts are a bad idea. I think, I mean, it even with the just massive amounts of different characters that I play, for me just being an actor, I do create self-insert characters. Like, it's fun to have a situation where you get to basically have a fantasy version of yourself that gets to go on adventures that you never have. So I think the idea of being able to create your own self-insert is really, really important. I don't understand why they don't allow that for everything. But again, this would be another instance where, again, speed for everything is 30 feet. If size can be anything that you want as well, it doesn't need to be listed here. You can just say you can choose to be medium or small. At the beginning of the races section, just say you can choose to be medium or small. And these are the rough heights for medium creatures, and this is the rough heights for medium or for small creatures. I actually would be more okay with that than I am with each race has a different definition of what medium and tall is. Because it seems to conflict with the ideas that they're trying to put forward here, and it just seems dumb. That being said, let's look at the special traits. I also haven't been talking about lifespan, because lifespan, an entire D&D campaign might, in-game time, might take a few months to a few years. So it really doesn't matter if you get old and die at 80 or if you get old and die at 350. Because you are only talking about a tiny, tiny portion of a character's overall life when they're an adventurer. That's it. So, yeah, I've been talking about lifespan because I really don't think it's a thing that needs to be talked about. So, dwarves traits. They've got dark vision. They have dwarven resilience, resistant to poison damage, and advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the poison condition. This is, again, traditional dwarf things. Dwarven toughness, hit point maximum increased by 1. So they effectively have half the tough feat from current 5e. Which, again, this is other than not changing their con saves, Dwarven toughness is basically you have a +2 to con. Because that's what a +2 to con, other than your con saving throws not getting higher. And again, because con saves a lot of time are going to be against poison. Poison and cold are the two things you do con saves against. Dwarven resistance means you have a bonus to the thing that you normally roll Constitution saves throw. And Dwarven toughness, the other aspect of Constitution, you've effectively, literally, if you had just put in, you have a +2 to Constitution, it would do almost the exact same thing you have here. And that's it. Forge-wise, you gain tool proficiency with 2 of the following options of your choice. Bunch of, jeweler's tools, mason's tools, smith's tools. You get a tool proficiency. Now, again, tools in 5th edition right now really are not that useful. Other than thieves' tools, you almost never use them in 5th edition. Aside from a few things like artificers will make tinker tools checks every so often. But in the current version of 5th edition to the D&D, which is apparently the upgraded version of, giving tool proficiency really doesn't do a ton. So it's interesting that they're doing this. I want to see them do something where that actually is given weight. Because again, other races get things like breath weapons or the ability to fly as a bonus action. Getting extra tool proficiency really doesn't do much unless there's something to use them on. And thus far, we haven't seen anything. Because again, this isn't even playtest material. This is, hey, does this look cool? And the final thing they get is stone cutting. As a bonus action, you gain tremor sense within a range for 60 feet for 10 minutes. You must be on a stone surface or touching such a surface to use this tremor sense. The stone can be natural or worked. And then you can use bonus action number of times to get proficiency bonus, blah, blah, blah. That, I think, is probably the most interesting evolution of the dwarf. Dwarves in general, like, watch the opening of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Or Fellowship of the Ring. So I'm going to see if I can actually look this up. It began with the forging. Okay, so here it is. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. Dwarves have always had this thing where they are miners and they work in the earth and things like that, even in other fantasy settings, like in World of Warcraft, in the Warcraft lore, dwarves were actually created by the Titans out of stone. Like, they literally are made of rocks. So the idea of dwarves having this inherent connection to mining and the ground and stuff like that, that has almost always been canonical. Since the version of dwarves that we most associate with fantasy, which is the Tolkien version of dwarves, have existed. So giving them, like, stone cutting before used to be, well, you know a lot about rocks. You know a lot about rocks. So, like, if you see a rock, you can look at the rock and you can go, that's a rock, and that's a cool rock. It was really how it was, and it was kind of pointless. As a bonus action, getting Tremor Sense, that's actually cool. I think that's really, really interesting. That also means dwarves, as long as they're on stone, actually have a defense against the darkness spell. Because the darkness spell is magical darkness. Your normal dark vision doesn't work in it. So dwarves having Tremor Sense means that they actually can do things underground and in dark, magically dark places that other races can't. I think it's kind of cool. That is the one thing in this thus far that I've seen. Hey, that could be kind of fun. And again, tying it to proficiency bonus means it's actually useful and gets more useful as you level up. Things like that. So that's actually interesting. Everything else in here is very standard dwarf stuff, except for the Forge-wise stuff, which again is standard dwarf stuff. But until they show me what you're going to use these tools for in the game, it's a pointless collection of words that means nothing to me, because I'm never going to use it in any game that I run. So yeah, dwarves. Moving on. The next race, Elves. Elves have probably been the quote-unquote most problematic race in D&D, because there are so many different flavors of elves, and every single one of them just seems to get baggage handed to it in some way, shape, or form. Dark elves get accused of racism. Wild elves get accused of racism for an entirely different race. Like every time they add in a new flavor of elf, which doesn't exist in any other race. Humans are supposed to be massively varied, but never have you gotten different flavors of humans. And dwarves have started getting more. Like you do get what are they called? Dark dwarves. I can't remember what they're called anymore. So they started adding that, but elves have always had, high elves versus wood elves and things like that, which really was kind of pitched as a cultural thing that turned biological, because wood elves are more dexterous, whereas high elves are more intelligent and things like that. The elves here are going to kind of follow that trope. And again, we have another different definition of what medium means. Size for elves, they're medium, about 5 to 6 feet tall. So medium means different things for elves, and then they live for about 750 years. Special traits. Dark vision, again, out to 60 feet. We've seen that. Elven lineage. And this is what I tend to be seeing, because it started with the Ardling, and then it follows with the elves. You get something built in from your lineage, and then 3rd and 5th level gives you spells to cast. Which, again, is not 100% outside the realm of reason, because Dark Elves in Standard 5th Edition get the ability to cast Fairy Fire and the Levitate spell intrinsically. High Elves get free cantrips, things like that. So it's not like it's never been a part of Elves before, but they really have kind of standardized it to where you will see this lineage thing do the exact same thing on a few different races, where you get a 1st level ability, 3rd level you can cast a spell, 5th level you can cast a spell. And that, to me, gets boring. So, and then it works the same thing. Intelligence, Wisdom, Charisma, choose it. You get Fey Ancestry, Keen Senses. Keen Senses gives you Perception skill. Fey Ancestry, advantage on Charms. And then Trance. So those things are things we already go. However, the 3 different lineages, the 3 different flavors. For Drow, Your dark vision is 120 instead of 60, and you know the dancing light cantrip. High elf, you know prestidigitation, and whenever you finish a long rest, you can replace that cantrip with a different cantrip from the arcane spell list. So that's another one that, again, seems weird. Prestidigitation, super useful, but the ability to choose any cantrip from the arcane spell list every day is really, really powerful. Now, if you compare that to... Oh, and the other thing is you get to choose intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. So it's from the arcane spell list, but it's any spellcasting ability modifier you want. That is really, really powerful compared to the Ardling, where they have very specific spells, a lot of which are not that useful. This is just kind of open season on min-maxing. And then Wood Elf, your speed is increased to 35 feet. That's, again, another kind of default Wood Elf thing. You also... excuse me. You also have the Druidcraft cantrip. Druidcraft is the nature version of Thaumaturgy and Prestidigitation. So that's fine. So the High Elf already seems to be, power-wise, just seems to be massively more useful. Because Dancing Lights can be useful in quite a few different situations. Druidcraft, again, there's a lot of different situations. But High Elves can actually attack with their cantrips. And cantrips get more powerful as you level up. So they are always going to be more beneficial across the board. At 3rd level, Drow get Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire, by far, one of the most underutilized spells in 5th edition. It's awesome. I love it. High Elves get Detect Magic, a remarkably useful spell. And then Wood Elves get Longstrider. No one uses Longstrider. It's just not that useful. If I remember correctly, it just gives you a static, like 10 or 20 foot bonus to your speed. So it's not like it doubles your speed or triples. So if you're already a fast character, Longstrider generally is not going to be doing much. Like if you're a monk or something, Longstrider really isn't going to be doing much for you. So Wood Elf seems to be kind of getting the short end of the stick here, because Dark Vision up to 120 feet is really good, and then Fairy Fire is massively good. You go to 5th level, Drow get Darkness. Again, that is traditional Drow. Fairy Fire, Darkness, and Levitate are the 3 spells they normally get. So that's totally makes sense. High Elves get Misty Step. Teleportation is always useful. 100% of the time, teleportation is useful. So Misty Step, very useful. Wood Elves get Pass Without a Trace. Pass Without a Trace is really useful. Plus 10 to stealth checks. There isn't a situation where that isn't useful. Like if you need to stealth, there are a lot of situations where you need to stealth, Pass Without a Trace is going to be useful. And it affects anyone within like 20 or 30 feet of you. Pass Without a Trace, super useful. Misty Step, massively useful. Darkness has its uses, but it's built into the Drow at this point. Like it's just like Drow have always, since they were introduced, had this ability of controlling darkness and the Fairy Fire. Like those are things that have existed for years and years and years. So it just makes sense that they didn't change that. The rest of it, like I said, the Wood Elf gets screwed over until Pass Without a Trace, and the High Elf just is good. Everything about the High Elves is just good. Again, High Elves have always gotten an additional cantrip, but the thing with it in 5th edition is they had to choose the cantrip from the Wizard spell list, and it had to be intelligence-based. So there was some limitations to where if you were creating a kind of non-traditional High Elf, you weren't kind of getting carte blanche to do anything that you wanted with it. This does give you that kind of carte blanche. So, moving on. I also find it interesting. They describe, and I don't know if maybe this is just me not being as up to date on Drow anymore. But they do they not give descriptions of them? So traditionally, maybe it is that they're just gray skin. Traditionally, I thought, and this is just going back years and years and years and years. I was under the assumption that Drow generally had like ebony black skin, not like black that we used to refer to anyone with darker skin. I mean, actually, physically, like black. It used to be, at least I thought it was, and now they call it gray skin. So I don't know if that's because I'm looking at it on D&D Beyond right now. I don't know if that's an update or just I'm way behind the times, but I thought that Drow used to be actually black skin because they live, again, they live in the Underdark, and technically you would think that would give them very, very pale skin, but they've just always had like super, super dark. That was why they were called Dark Elves. So yeah, they give some descriptions of them. Not a big deal. Moving on. The next race, Gnomes. Again, different definition of small. Gnomes are small at 3 to 4 feet tall. Gnomes are small at 3 to 4 feet tall, whereas small for other races might be 2 to 4 feet. Like again, there's no explanation as to why small is different for gnomes than any thing else. When you are giving humans this massive, massive thing, and Ardlings similarly. Anyway, special traits: dark vision, gnomish cunning. You have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. That is massive. It used to be advantage on spell saves, or like they would define it specifically. This is just every intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throw. That is really, really good. And then you have a lineage. And the lineages, you have forest and rock gnomes. Forest, you get the minor illusion, and then you can cast speak with animals. And then rock gnomes get mending and prestidigitation. So that's another one where minor illusion, there's a lot of uses for that. Speak with animals is actually a leveled spell, whereas rock gnomes just get 2 cantrips. The mending cantrip can be pretty useful. Prestidigitation, again, is the I'm magic cantrip. So that's kind of interesting. But other than that, like, there's really nothing about the gnome that's like, oh, this would be really cool. Like, that's all they get. They do have, in addition, you can spend 10 minutes casting prestidigitation to create a tiny clockwork device, such as toy, fire starter. I guess, this is the rest of rock gnomes, so they get a lot more. Sorry, rock gnomes get a lot more. You can spend 10 minutes casting prestidigitation, create a tiny clockwork device. Casting it consumes 10 gold of raw materials, and then when you create the device, you determine its function by choosing one of the effects from prestidigitation. And the device produces that effect whenever you or another creature takes a bonus action to touch the device and activate it. Wow, is this overly complicated? You can have 3 such devices that exist at a time. Each one dismantles itself 8 hours after its creation. You also touch one of your devices and dismantle it as an action. As the device is dismantled, the 10 gold materials can be reclaimed. So these little clockwork devices have an AC and have a hit point. And they're massively complicated, effectively, to use your bonus action to cast prestidigitation. So this is where, for me, this is complexity for complexity's sake. Because it's basically, you spend 10 minutes and 10 gold worth of raw materials, and you can use prestidigitation as a bonus action. Like, that's what it is, and anyone can use prestidigitation as a bonus action. But you can only use one aspect of prestidigitation that is chosen when you make it. Like, that's all they would have had to do, but they go into this huge, huge explanation that they don't really need. And it doesn't need an AC and it doesn't need a hit point, because all it is you can cast Prestidigitation as a bonus action with some limitations. That's all it is. So, yeah. Weird stuff. Moving on. I think I'm going to have to do backgrounds as a different video, because this video is already hour and 44 minutes. Halflings. Everybody loves a halfling. Again, different definition of what small is, because halflings are different than anything else. And special traits of the halfling: brave. You have advantage on saving throws. You make to avoid or end the frightened condition, which is nice. Frightened condition is a kind of bad condition, but it becomes less useful at higher levels. We have a bunch of different ways to avoid fear. Halfling Nimbulus. You can move through the space of any creature that is of a size larger than yours, but you can't stop there. Interesting thing about this, normally they make mention of moving through another creature's space counts as difficult terrain. They don't here, so that may just be a default rule, or it may be that halflings don't treat it as difficult terrain. Either way, I would like some kind of clarification on that. And then luck. Whenever you roll a 1, you get to re-roll it. And naturally stealthy, you have proficiency in the stealth skill. So again, halflings have always been based around the character of Bilbo Baggins. Not Frodo, which, because Lord of the Rings, the movie series, came out before the Hobbit movie series, most kind of modern fans of Tolkien are significantly more familiar with Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry. However, halflings in D&D were generally meant to emulate Bilbo, and specifically when little Lord of the Rings history for you, when Gandalf was effectively trying to convince the dwarves to add Bilbo to their party, he carved a symbol on Bilbo's door that identified Bilbo as a burglar. And when they come in, they go, yes, we have need of a burglar. Bilbo was not a burglar in any way, shape, or form. He had no skills at sneaking or anything. However, hobbits in Tolkien lore did have kind of a natural ability to go unnoticed. They weren't invisible or anything. They just naturally were people that the other races just generally didn't notice. They wouldn't look at them. They wouldn't focus on them. They could generally pass by. So one of the reasons the Shire lasted as long as it did as its own thing, because most of the other races, it wasn't that the halflings couldn't do anything or anything. The reason that they kept to themselves is the rest of the races didn't really know them. And so that lends itself to burglaring very well. But Bilbo wasn't a burglar until he went on this adventure and basically picked up the skills. The ring that turned him invisible helped. But that's where the Dungeons & Dragons version of the halfling comes from. The original halfling was a class, and it was your thief class. So halflings have always had this predisposition towards being thieves and rogues and things like that. And so naturally stealthy kind of fits into that idea. And I think it technically fits a little bit more with the kind of Tolkien version of the halfling than a lot of the other ones that have just made them, like in 3rd edition, their preferred class was rogue, if I remember correctly. And they had other things like that that basically turned them into rogues. And that really isn't how Tolkien described them, which is what Gygax drew his inspiration from. It wasn't that they were thieves or that they were good at doing thief-like things, or even that they were good at being stealthy. What it was is that other races naturally just didn't notice them. They were unnoticed. They were unnoticeable. They were unremarkable. There was nothing about them that would catch your eye on purpose. And so I think naturally stealthy fits that theme a little bit better. Again, none of this makes me excited to play a halfling. It's all standard stuff that has always been a part of halfling lore. I personally, I don't think I've ever built a halfling character, just because halfling luck has had a really, really bad connotation, at least in the Adventures League circles back when I was doing that, because it was just something that was really players would use it constantly to try and outgame the GM, and they would. It's hard to misinterpret luck, but they would find ways to do it. And they would claim that the lucky feet also gave them halfling luck and stuff. Like it was, so I just never built a halfling. Like it just wasn't my thing. I generally don't play halflings. Like even in RPGs and stuff, like halflings just have never been that big a draw to me. I've always loved elves. Dwarves I started getting a little bit more into, specifically because of World of Warcraft, because the dwarves in there are really, really interesting. The halflings has just never really thrilled me, so this has done nothing to change my opinion on them. It's not that they're bad, they're just nothing about it has gone, wow, I could create a real cool character out of that. Whereas every other race I have gone, hey, this could create an interesting story. So, yeah, and by the way, my first Tolkien book was The Hobbit, and I loved The Hobbit. The Hobbit is one of my favorite books of all time. It is a brilliantly, brilliantly written book, significantly better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is not written anywhere near as well, and the pacing is really, really bad, especially in book 2, which the first half of book 2 is the battle, the prep work and everything for the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is really fun to read. The second half of book 2 is Frodo and Sam were walking, and then they were walking more. Let's walk and walk and walk and walk and walk till you're on the floor. Fuck me, it was boring. So yeah, anyway. So I love The Hobbit, and I love Bilbo as a character. Frodo and Sam, less so. Moving on. Orcs. Now again, traditionally, orcs are generic bad guys. They were meant to give you... They were literally created so that you could write about the good guys killing bad guys, and it didn't make the good guys bad guys because they were killing people. These were just generic bad guys. They were the Foot Clan robots, effectively. They were never meant to represent anyone. Anyone that makes the claim that orcs are somehow racist or anything, or racist tropes, is 100% wrong, and it's been disproven so many times. I made a video about it where I talked about the idea that orcs somehow represent racist stereotypes against blacks, and then at the same time they represent racist stereotypes against another ethnic group. It's complete malarkey. It always has been. It's people looking for a fight. So turning him into a player character race is kind of interesting, because you get to play as the generic bad guy, which again can give you lots of stories to tell. Again, being the one good guy in a bad guy race is a really interesting story. That is what R.A. Salvatore created an entire legacy off of, was the idea that he wrote about the one good dark elf. And pissed off a lot of people later on, but it's a really, really cool story to tell. So yeah, we get another different definition of what medium means. It's 6 to 7 feet tall for orcs. And then these are special traits. Adrenaline Rush, you can take the dash action as a bonus action. So again, cunning action for the rogue, a defining feature of the rogue. Nowhere near as useful, because now we have 2 different groups that can do exactly what the rogue can do in that instance. One of which gets a fly speed as part of it. And when you do so, you get a number of temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus. So again, a better version than what the rogue can do built in. This is the problem with this, is I'm talking about class features of 5th edition D&D. I have no idea if 1 D&D is going to give the rogue cunning actions again, or if cunning actions is going to work completely differently. We have no idea. The only thing we can compare this to is 5th edition now, and this just belittles the rogue and the monk, because the 2 things that can do the dash as a bonus action can do it better than the rogue and the monk can do. The orc version gives you temporary hit points. The Ardling version gives you a flying speed. And then you can use this trait a number of times to get proficiency bonus, blah, blah, blah. I do find something. I guess it's alphabetical because normally dark vision is the first thing that they list, and here it's second. That's because adrenaline rush starts with A, so I guess that makes perfect sense. I kind of like the idea of dark vision being listed first, whether or not it's alphabetical, just because again, dark vision is a remarkably useful thing. So, next they have powerful build. You count as a size larger return carrying capacity. I have never used carrying capacity in any of my games. And I cannot think of any of my DMing friends, and this is not just, people that I interact with now. Again, I used to run a convention. Or not me, not the whole convention. I was in charge of all organized play games for a decent sized convention. We got, I think the years that I did it, we got between 750 and 1,000 people over a 4-day weekend. So it's not Gen Con level, but it's not a small convention. And I would I would have generally between about 20 to 30 DMs a year that answered to me for depending on how many tables we were running. So, and I also, as a local coordinator, I did a lot with a lot of things, and I helped run the gaming programs at a couple different stores and stuff like that. So I got to know a lot of different DMs from all over Wisconsin and Illinois. Was mainly where my DMs came from. I think I had a couple that were from Minnesota. So yeah, I know a lot of DMs, and I've only gotten to know more doing this online. Nobody uses carrying capacity. It's a dumb rule. I mean, yeah, I understand there are some people that do, but it's just additional work for no real benefit. And it's meant to kind of try and prevent characters from doing like, I'm just carrying my boat with me. But common sense generally fixes most of that without needing a rule for it. So that has never been a big deal for me. The final part of the orc, which is another thing that exists in the half orc in 5th edition, is Relentless Endurance. Reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright. You can drop to 1 hit point instead. And then once you use this, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. It's almost identical to the current Relentless Endurance. Relentless Endurance is massively useful. It just is. There really isn't a way to undervalue Relentless Endurance. Being able to go to 1 hit point instead of 0 is so useful. Especially if you get hit by something nasty. Like if you get hit by a Disintegrate, as soon as you hit 0 hit points, you're dead. But Orcs, instead of dropping to hero points, you can drop to 1 hit point instead. You never hit 0 hit points. They've just wasted Disintegrate on you. It's nice. And that's the orc. It is literally the half orc. The only difference is it's an orc instead of a half orc. But there's nothing else that's different about this, which I find kind of interesting. Other than the fact that again, orcs are traditionally just your generic bad guys. I guess I've never quite understood why it was always half orcs that you had and not full orcs. But whatever. Moving on. I swear I did not expect this to take this long. The Tiefling. The Tiefling is meant to be the opposite of the Ardling now. Which, that may be why they made the Ardling instead of the Asmar. Because Ardling and Tiefling have a similarity to them. Ard versus Tief. So it's easier to see that they're designed to be polar opposites of each other. Whereas Aasimar and Tiefling are two very, very different words with very, very different... I can't think of the word right now. They come from very different parts of speech. So maybe that's why they created the Ardlings. I don't know. Tieflings get 3 different legacies, so different flavors. You have Abyssal, Chthonic, and Infernal. Then we go to the traits. Again, different definitions of small. 3 to 4 feet tall for Tieflings versus 2 to 4 feet tall for humans. And then special traits. Dark Vision, 60 feet, evil. Fiendish Legacy. You choose Abyssal, Chthonic, or Infernal. You get a 1st level, a 3rd level, and a 5th level. It is identical to the Elves. It is identical to the Ardlings. Again, they just use this same thing. The only time that they don't use this, apparently, is with the Gnomes. They have a different formula for the Gnomes. But everyone else is the exact same thing. And then the final thing they get is the Otherworldly Presence, which you get the Thaumaturgy cantrip. So they get an additional cantrip being a Tiefling, which again isn't that... Thaumaturgy is nice. It's not, game-breaking or anything. For Abyssal, you have resistance to poison damage and, poison spray. Chthonic, resistance to necrotic and, chill touch. Infernal, resistance to fire and, the firebolt. Again, if you compare the Tiefling to the Ardling, the Tiefling is just better. All of them give you a resistance to damage plus an attacking cantrip. A cantrip that actually gets more powerful as you level up. The cantrips that they have, I'm not saying Guidance is not a useful cantrip, but it is the same spell if you cast it when you're level 1 as it is when you cast it at level 20. Firebolt at level 1 does a d10 of damage. At level 20 does 4d10 damage. It is just a different class of thing entirely. Third level for Abyssal, they get Ray of Sickness. Ray of Sickness is another one that I never see people using, and in certain situations, Ray of Sickness is really useful. And then in other ones, it's just not. It does a little bit of damage, and does, I think, gives the poison condition. So it's a useful spell, but because it doesn't do as much damage as other things like Witch Bolt or something like that, a lot of people kind of undervalue it. So that's kind of a cool one. False Life is just not a useful spell. It just gives you some temporary hit points that aren't really worth much of anything. Warlocks can get a little bit out of False Life because they always cast their spells at the highest spell slot they can. So when you cast it at 5th level, you actually get a decent number of temporary hit points. But most other classes, it's not worth the spell slot. And then Hellish Rebuke is just always useful. And that used to be the default for Tieflings, is all Tieflings got Hellish Rebuke, because it kind of makes sense. You have Infernal Heritage, you also get Hellish Rebuke. It has the word hell in it. So yeah, and it also gives you a way to use your reaction, so action economy, that's good. Abyssal, at 5th level, they get Hold Person. Hold Person is by far one of the most useful controlling spells in the game, because it inflicts the Paralyzed condition. Paralyzed removes concentration spells because you are incapacitated. It also gives advantage on all attack rolls against that. You auto-fail your strength and dex saves. And any melee attacks made within 5 feet are auto-crits if they hit. Hold Person is massively useful. When you combine it with Ray of Sickness, which gives the poison condition, Abyssal Tieflings have a good kit built into them, significantly better than most of the stuff you get with the other races. Chthonic gets False Life, and then 5th level they get Ray of Enfeeblement, which Ray of Enfeeblement is another one that's just not that great. I have to look it up again. Yeah, the only thing it does is the target deals half damage with weapon attacks that use strength. So it has a very limited use in that it has to be a creature that uses strength as their attacks and makes weapon attacks. If it is not specifically a weapon attack, Ray of Enfeeblement doesn't do anything. So compared to Hold Person, Ray of Enfeeblement is useless. And then for Infernal, you get the Darkness spell, which again is okay, but that is already kind of built into Drow. And it's a useful spell. And they do, Infernal do get the highest damaging cantrip. So I guess it's a kind of, given to take. Darkness is a useful spell. I think it's probably more useful than Ray of Enfeeblement. Nowhere near as good as Hold Person. So, yeah. So that is the races. I meant to get through the backgrounds in this. We've talked about these for 2 hours. So I'm going to do a separate video for backgrounds because this is already way too long. But yeah, so final thoughts. Overall, there's nothing about the races that really thrills me. There isn't. Ardlings was cool because it's the first time they've introduced a completely brand new race in a long time, and I thought that was interesting. But the way they pull them off doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I think they're just poorly written. The rest of these are just bland. Nothing about this gives me an idea of, oh, that would be a really cool character to create. And the backgrounds as well just don't feel great. We'll talk about those in the next video. But overall, it's not good. It's not bad. It's nothing because so much of what is here is going to rely on how the rest of the game plays. Because like I said, there's two different races that basically give both Step of the Wind from the monk and Cunning Action for the rogue. It significantly reduces their usefulness. And I'm not okay with that. I don't want people to make something as important as the choice of their class be kind of mitigated by the fact and the things that make their class special be mitigated by races that can do what their class can do, but better and more often. Like, I'm not a huge fan of that. But again, we have no idea what the new classes are going to look like. So it's possible that Cunning Action's no longer a thing, and rogues are going to be defined about something completely different. Monks may have a completely different kit. They may actually be a damage-focused class instead of control-focused class. Because again, a lot of people don't like the monk in 5th edition because they don't understand how control classes work. So maybe they'll just go, so many people complained about it, we're going to turn the monk into a damage dealer. I wouldn't like that. I'd be pissed off if that happened. But that may be it. And then all the stuff that I'm complaining about doesn't mean anything here because we have nothing to base this on. We have been given part of a book and we're supposed to figure out, well, what do you think of the ending? I haven't read the ending. I've barely read the beginning. How am I supposed to give you an opinion on the book or the plot? Like, you haven't introduced the main conflict of your story in this little, introduction paragraph. So yeah, overall, there's nothing here that I go, ooh, that could be cool, compared to like the rules section where there's quite a few things where I'm like, hey, this could be really interesting. There's nothing here that does that for me. There's not a ton here that really upsets me either. Like I said, there's a few things I'm like, I don't like this, or I think this is wrong, but it's entirely based on 5th edition, and this could be something completely different. We don't know. So, yeah. Otherwise, that is me all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. That's really hard to say with this is a stutter. In the comments down below. Do any of these races for you guys give you a good idea for an interesting character just based on the racial traits we've talked about here? Let me know in the comments down below if this excites you. Otherwise, that's all for me today. I'll see you guys in the next time, all right? Bye-bye.